Welcome to United Theological Seminary. I'm Dr. Justin Saviatanis, Assistant Professor for Social Transformation and Christian Ethics, and the Director of the Social Transformation Program. I'm very excited to welcome you here tonight to our program, looking at after the fall of Roe, where do we go from here? Part of how United is responding to current events as they're happening. And we are extremely lucky to have with us tonight Reverend Kelli Clement, who's an alum of United and also the assistant minister at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, where her portfolio includes social justice and pastoral care. She also serves as quarter-time minister for the St. Croix Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Wisconsin. The 2010 MDiv graduate and former board member of United Theological Seminaries, Kelli is also the former executive director of the Minnesota Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice and worked as a training consultant for the national office of RCRC, educating clergy around the country in pastoral care for reproductive decisions and reproductive loss. And I love her, the closing line of her bio says, art play as a spiritual practice helps her cope with living through the apocalypse. So please welcome as we talk about this most relevant and urgent issue right now as we await the Supreme Court's decision. Reverend Kelli Clement, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Justin, and hello, United Seminary and current students and alums. I'm a booster of United and always delighted to participate in programs here. So it's good to be in this beautiful space, and wherever you are and whenever you're watching this, I'm glad to be with you. I wrote this piece for the Unitarian Universalist Association when they were creating some worship resources around reproductive health rights and justice. I just want to check something quickly. There we go. I've got that right. This is called Learn to Tell Your Story. My most impactful life decisions in chronological order: to have abortions when I needed them, to get sober, to give birth to our child. If each life is precious, so is mine, so is hers, so is yours. I do not regret nor feel shameful about my abortions. Rather, I am grateful for access to abortion care by compassionate, professional providers, and for, as Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison has said, the opportunity to captain my own ship. Here's a wish list for all of us, especially for my adult child's generation: robust reproductive justice, health, and freedom without stigma or restriction. An end to heteronormative, patriarchal white supremacy culture, and love and liberation in abundance. May it be so. These are indeed challenging, apocalyptic times that we are living in. I've taken to referring to it as apocalyptic times, and even as we experience a beautiful springtime here in Minnesota, I say it's a good thing that the apocalypse didn't cancel the spring, because as always, we as theological people hold the beauty and the brokenness of the world. Those two things are always true. And part of being theological people is making sense of the beauty and the brokenness, and making sense of what it means to be human and held in as meaning-making people in profound space. So tonight, and in two subsequent events, I want to take some time to do these things. Here's how we're going to do it. Tonight, I'm going to talk a bit about the landscape of what we know now as we anticipate and are living into a post-Roe v. Wade reality. It's not if Roe v. Wade will fall, it's when that will be made manifest and how we're living into that reality. How we navigate our grief, let's acknowledge and navigate that grief if that is true for you. And let's talk a bit about theology and what a reframe of theology might be. So that's what I want to do tonight. And then on July 13th, which is the second Wednesday in July, we'll talk about pastoral care for reproductive decisions and reproductive loss. And then on August 3rd, we'll talk about activism for reproductive rights from a faith perspective. So 3 parts, all from a, if you're getting it from me, you're getting it from a similar frame. I make no pretense of being unbiased about this. I just want to be quite clear from the beginning. I'm not making any pretense of being unbiased. I am unabashedly in favor of people being able to captain their own ship, to make their own reproductive health care choices as an expression of liberation. So the landscape right now is that with the leak of the Supreme Court decision in the Dobbs v. Jackson case, we expect that actual decision to come down any day now. The Supreme Court has really said that they're not trying to just chip away a little bit or let Roe, chip around the edges some more as they have done in the past, but completely overturn it. And Justice Scalia has said, here's the legal framework that he wishes to overturn, that the framework of privacy, which was the legal bedrock for, and it's out of the 14th Amendment, if I'm correct about that. He says that's not a good legal framework, and he wishes to overturn that. And that probably will happen. There are some 26 states in the United States that have what are known as trigger laws, and immediately when Roe falls, abortion will immediately become illegal in those states. Minnesota is not one of those states. That's good. We're not perfect here. We do still have access, and we expect access to remain legal, and I'll say why in a minute. But the states around us, specifically North Dakota, South Dakota, and probably Wisconsin, will fall pretty quickly. Iowa seems to be more safe at this moment, depends on who you ask, and there's a lot of unknowns. But as you well know, many of you have seen the maps, and I've given Stella some resources, and she's going to share out some resources. And one of those is a map, and you can see what the landscape looks like if Roe falls, when Roe falls. In Minnesota, there was a 1995 Supreme Court decision called Doe v. Gomez. And the Gomez decision said 2 really important things. One, that Minnesotans have the right to decide to have an abortion, and the right to, they have a right to have an abortion and the right to decide to have an abortion without the government putting their thumb on the scale. So one of the things that did is make abortion stronger legal protection in our state. It means that Minnesota Care pays for abortion care in our state with some limits on it. And it means that we can withstand a number of legal challenges that states like Texas, Oklahoma, Mississippi, where the Dobbs case is happening, are not able to withstand. That is not to say that legislators, anti-choice legislators in Minnesota have not put forth ridiculous number of bills to chip away at access to abortion rights in Minnesota. And certainly with an anti-choice legislature and governorship, they could realign the Supreme Court. That Supreme Court decision could be overturned. It is not enshrined in the Constitution. Things change, as we see with Roe, but we do have a much stronger protection in this state. Currently, there are 5 abortion clinics in Minnesota. There's one in Duluth, there are 3 in the Twin Cities, and there's 1 in Rochester. We are already seeing an influx of patients from out of state. I mean, even before the leak of the Supreme Court decision, people from Western Wisconsin come to Minnesota, people from North and South Dakota and Iowa. I mean, people come here from other states. When these other states fall, we'll continue to see a real influx of patients to these 5 clinics. We're already seeing patients from Texas, from Oklahoma, and we'll see more from Mississippi and Florida and Missouri. And of course, people who need abortion care will find who can afford to get to abortion care will seek it out and find it. In Wisconsin, most of the, I believe I'm right about this, the abortion clinics are in the eastern part of the state, in Milwaukee and Madison, and there will be a large influx to Chicago. Illinois will remain legal, but there's already a huge waiting period in Chicago. When you need abortion care, you need it now, right? You don't need to wait, you need it now. And so as this influx comes in, we're seeing longer wait times, which puts abortion later, which increases the cost, which makes it, it's an incredibly safe procedure, but as with any medical procedure, the longer you wait, the more complications there can be. So you want to have abortion services available, accessible as quickly as you can. I think there's a lot that is unknown, and ain't that the truth of the world that we live in, right? There's a lot that is unknown. When Roe falls, this legal, the dismantling of the legal frame of privacy, also, as you have read, I mean, I'm no legal expert, but you've read and you've seen the dismantling of the privacy law or the frame has a lot to do with marriage equality. It may have something to do with interracial marriage, with lots of ways that it affects our lives. Americans have, we've centered our lives, we've built our lives around the right to privacy, and captained our own ships with that understanding. And so I think there's an awful lot of things we don't know how it will fall out. And when I get to the theology piece, I want to talk a little bit about how we got here. That's a little bit about what we know about the current landscape. The support for abortion rights is as high as it's ever been in this country. I believe I just recently read a poll that it's 55% full support and pretty high percentage for other levels of support. 55% support with very few restrictions, even higher percentages of support with some restrictions, right? It's always been over 50%. But as we know with other things, for example, gun safety regulations, which background checks have 90% support, even among gun owners, right? It doesn't matter when a small, extremely vocal and well-funded minority is holding sway. And so I think that's one of the things that the theocracy, that's how, as theologians, we need to be able to talk about and separate out what are moral questions and theocratic questions. So that's a little bit of what I'm thinking about there. Okay. I said a lot really quickly. Do you have any questions about kind of the landscape, the legal landscape that I might be able to touch at the moment? Anything, is that kind of clear? Okay. Like I say, I'm not an attorney, and I learn this from really smart people who tell me this. I read a lot about it, and I learn a lot from smart people who tell me. So I think I've got, at least for today, my feet on the ground what it is, but it's changing pretty quickly. So let me say a word about our grief. My grief. I'll speak for my grief. Recently, I was going through some papers in my study, some papers that had come to me from a woman who was doing theological work with the Unitarian Universalist Association and the UU Women's Federation. And she was working on the Reproductive Freedom Project from about 1978 to 93. And her little archive of papers had come to me. I can't remember why but they gave it to me. And I started going through these, and I thought, oh, dadgum, this is the same things, the things that she said to do, the things that we were trying to do. Talk to your legislators, and here's the danger, and here's what they're coming for. All that, it could have been written today. It could have exactly been written today. And it was disheartening. And it was also powerfully loving. That when we stand against oppression of any kind that threatens to crush our hearts, to break us, that's loud and mean, that wants to take our liberty and freedom and dignity, we don't stand alone. First of all, there are others right now who are standing with us. There are others right now who are standing side by side with us. But there has always been a resistance to the powers of empire. There has always been a resistance to the powers of oppression. And so I took strength from Betty's words and her efforts and her organizing and her tidy handwriting and her typewritten messages. And I thought, I don't know how long we'll keep doing this, but what's the choice? To stop? I don't think so. I'm not going to stop. And I am brokenhearted. I've been doing this work for, 30 years. I met my husband at a pro-choice rally. And in that pile of papers also, I found my own writing and journaling about my abortions. And I was a mess. I was just a mess in those years, and it was absolutely the right thing to do not to parent at that time. And the grief that I have is that we've been working so earnestly for so long, and the powers of oppression are winning. I mean, they're winning. I just want to be really clear about that. It doesn't do any good, I think, to say, well, they won't really win, or maybe at the last minute there'll be a relief. I don't think it's helpful to say that. I think there are things that we can do to not end in despair, but it's helpful to name what is actually true and to do the work of grief. It is helpful to do the work of grief. As theological people, we are equipped to handle grief, to go into the belly of it and know that there is meaning for us there also somewhere on the other side. I am not a person who believes that everything happens for a reason. I am a person who believes that things happen and we make meaning out of it. And so grief and its companion anger can be righteous and healthy when processed in a righteous and healthy way. And I think it is worthy of us who work in justice to name and process and live in our grief and then get up and do the work. But if we skip over that, or if we just stay mad without doing the grief work, I think we miss something. As you can tell, I'm still processing this a little bit, and I don't want to pretend like I've got answers to it. So I think as we're really in the midst of it, it's still raw for us. And so I want to name that it is live for me. My own spiritual practice, as Justin mentioned, I do art play as a spiritual practice, and I spend a lot of time, sort of scribbling in red, and I do some weeping, and I make art about things that are painful. That's one way that I deal with it. I have a prayer life. I have a baking life. Baking helps. And so nature helps. And I think finding those things, therapy helps. I go to therapy every other week, and talking about the ways that this is heavy on us, and that it counts for all the ways that we live in the world. It's helpful to say that. I'm going to pause here for just a moment and just ask, are there ways in your justice work that you navigate grief, or how does your spiritual life help you navigate the grief that goes with the work?
I would say spending time in nature, because it reconnects with a sense of ongoing renewal and resurrection. That is, it is impossible to be out in the world, especially here in Minnesota, without seeing things that are constantly growing. Even in the winter, the roots of the trees, the minute they get a little space from the frost, continue to grow. And so I think this sense that there is always life and renewal, and there's death that is part of the process. So I think allowing that cycle of grief grief and remembering that there's rebirth that comes.
I love that, being in nature for the cycle of renewal and resurrection, and that cycle of life from birth to death to rebirth, and even in the winter that happens. Minnesota really brings that to us, doesn't it? Yeah, yeah. Anything that you would add to that? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No,
Yeah.
I have many thoughts on the matter, but I'm still in the kind of the anger fear mode.
Yes.
Much of it, and I worry it is, as you said, it's more the one political domino that's going to cascade into multiples.
Right.
It is very fascinating to me in some ways how I think what we have is a choice desert.
Yes.
So, you know, that when we look at that map, it starts to look like these are going to be isolated areas that are surrounded by places where people don't have access to this thing.
Right.
What's the next thing?
What's the next thing? Right.
And it makes it really hard to sit here and say we're a United States.
Yes, very much.
Yeah, they're to me, what's happening at the federal level is deliberately tearing that federal part apart. And I wonder, is it just this issue, or is this the issue they're using to make all that happen? Then I start conspiracy.
Right, right. And you're not crazy for that, right? It's not just conspiracy theory thinking to be stuck in anger and fear. And so I think as theological people, how we eventually, not immediately, but eventually use our spiritual practices as a way of processing our anger and fear into grief and action. And it's not linear, like grief is never linear. I think there are lots of ways to move it. I think what feels especially scary to me is to get stuck in that place. And for me, stuckness, anger and fear and stuckness leads to isolation.
I think that's a really good point that you made, though, is that, you know, a lot of people have no idea what the action should be.
Right.
They almost need a suggestion list of, and, you know, we call all the legislatures and we get on social media, we do these things, but it's not changing things. So it's that, how do we, from a social justice lens, figure out we've got to do something different?
Right.
And what is that spiritually that we can do, but also what is that actionable thing that we can do to make us feel less stuck?
Right, less stuck. I happen to have a few suggestions. Stay tuned. What is the thing that we can do? I don't have the solution in mind, but I do have some thoughts about it. Let me move us into kind of a theological frame and talk a little bit about how I think we got here. And again, I've been thinking about this for a long time. And as a Unitarian Universalist, I don't want to make myself out to be an expert on Christian or Jewish or any other theology, but I do have some resources to think about that. What I see right now is the theocracy of authoritarianism and the theology of dominionism, which is actually leads to this Christian nationalism. We shall have dominion. That a specific fundamentalist Christianity, I think we can call it Christianism, not Christianity, but Christianism, shall have dominion over all the laws of our country. It is a direct affront to the First Amendment of the separation of church and state. As much as the proponents of this enshrine the Second Amendment, they are completely willing to throw away the First Amendment. There is no so-called pro-life movement outside a Christianist frame. There may well be secular people who would describe themselves as pro-life. I don't want to say that is not so. And I use pro-life and pro-choice a little bit in quotes. I think the labels are a pain in the patoot. But there is no anti-choice movement that was not begun in the Christianist frame. The theology of personhood that turns on the moment of conception, my understanding is that this comes out of a Catholic frame, a Catholic theology, and it has now been co-opted by political forces that see this as exactly a thing for control. Now, I don't doubt for a second that there are people who care deeply, who are deeply committed to the belief that at the moment of conception, a fetus is a full human being, and care tenderly about that. I mean, I believe that they believe. I don't want to argue belief. I can't do that. What I do believe, what I do think is that a fetus is an especially wonderful object to advocate for. It's easy to be emotionally manipulated by that. It makes no demands on you. You know, it's easy to be emotionally manipulated by an innocent baby.
If you're not carrying.
If you're not carrying it, right. And so I think that side of the movement has been especially focused and well organized to have every one of us in the country, no matter where we think about abortion rights. When we think about abortion rights, we think about the womb. We think about that tiny being in the womb. We think about that moment of conception. And many of us, most of us, get hooked on, but what is the moment of personhood? But when is that moment? I think that we need to completely get out of the womb. And I didn't make this up. Black women first articulated in the 90s the frame of reproductive justice. And it was a frame of getting out of the womb. Reproductive justice says that all people have the right to have children, the right not to have children, and the right to raise our children in safe and healthy environments. The right to have children, the right to not have children, the right to not have children, and the right to raise our children in safe and healthy environments. Man, if that is not looking at the totality of liberation, the decision whether or not to carry a pregnancy to term becomes one decision in a panoply of other ones. And there's a whole matrix of things that you might include in making that decision. I think when we get focused on what's the moment that life begins, we have entered into a frame that can only be theological and never legislated. It can only be a theological decision and never legislated. As a religious naturalist, I would say that life began on this planet 6.5 billion years ago, and every organism is a flowering on the tree of life. Some of them survive into a fullness of life, and some do not. Nature creates all the time and everywhere with abundance and with life that doesn't come to fruition. It's thought that one out of every 4 pregnancies ends in miscarriage. And if these laws go through, miscarriage will be punished as a crime. That's an affront to nature. That is an affront to nature, and clearly laws made by people who don't understand biology a bit. So as a theologian, I have to hold both what it means to be a human being, holding whatever philosophy, scripture, tradition that I hold, alongside the results of science. I'm not willing to stand in a theology that doesn't also revere the results of science. As progressive theologians, we agree. I think I can say that's true of United. We stand in progressive theology, both holding the results of science and the traditions to which we belong, and making meaning out of the context of the two. So I'm not going to I'm not going to argue proof text with you about there are some number of scriptures that people point back to the Hebrew Bible and say, you know, I knew you in the womb, or I knit you together in the womb. I'm not going to go there. Hebrew theologians have said, don't use those to proof text the right to abortion or the right to life or any of those such things. What I do want to say theologically, as a moral question, is when we talk about abortion as a necessary but also tragic choice, we are introducing stigma into a situation that we really don't know anything about. It was not a tragic choice for me to have the 2 abortions that I had. I don't need an excuse to say why I had it, but I was an active alcoholic. I had no business being a parent. I was, as I've said, I was a mess. I knew that parenting would be the most important decision that I would make in my lifetime. And I would not be the mom, wife, minister, alum, friend, tax-paying citizen that I am today, had I not been able to have abortions when I needed them. But I don't think anyone needs to have an excuse, and we don't need to say that some abortions are okay and some are not. It's not my business. What I want to do is create the systems that uphold life and liberation for every person on the planet, so that they can make the decisions in their lives that let them captain their own ship. that let them have life abundant, not prosperity gospel, not all the things, but liberation abundant, so that they can make the best decision for themselves and for their families. Because I promise you, no one is more of an expert on anyone else's life than the person who's living it. Those are the ways that I like to think about theology around this. I'm just looking to see if I had another note on it. I've included in this resource list the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, a really wonderful organization out of Washington, D.C. And they've got a resource page. So you can check on there to see what have various Protestant denominations said about abortion over the years. What have, there's an organization called Catholics for Choice. What are various Jewish groups? You know, there are different, I'm not going to get this right, flavors, that's not the right word, different sects, maybe, yeah, conservative, reform, Orthodox, etc. Different sects might say about abortion. The Center for American Progress is listed on here, and their religion and faith page is a really great resource for different organizations with whom they partner. And so like if you go there and go to the Auburn Seminary page, or to, oh, I can't think of them off my head, but you'll see different ones, and those are great theological resources if you want to dig down a little bit and see what some of those places are saying. I've also put two local organizations that I want to lift up. One is Unrestrict Minnesota. Unrestrict is a coalition of 26 grassroots organizations who are committed to educating Minnesotans about abortion laws in our state and keeping abortion safe and accessible. First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis is one of those organizations. And then Our Justice is the Minnesota's abortion fund, and they are helping people who are coming from greater Minnesota and from out of state to get here. They help with logistical plans, they help with travel plans, they help with funding if they need it, and so on. So when people are looking for places to put their dollars for this, I think the big national organizations are great. They do great work, but my money goes to the abortion fund in our state. And those are dollars that go directly to people who need our help. And so that's where I put my money. And then one of the resources is a map. And so I'm sure that somehow on this email or this Zoom that Stella will get that attached to it. I want to say just a couple of words about language. And I'll repeat this again because I feel really strongly about this. Many folks in the pro-choice movement, progressive people have clung tightly to the language of safe, legal, and rare. That abortion was okay if it was safe, legal, and rare. I think that word rare contributes to stigma, and I've dropped it, and I invite you to consider dropping it too if that's language that you use or you hear people use. Here's why. It says that some abortions are okay and some are not. Like I said, I've been doing this work for, I don't know, 30 years, something like that. It was not until this year that I put the S on my abortions when I talk about them. I only talked about my abortion as singular because one was okay. I could make that choice. But 2 was just, that was just stupid. And I was ashamed of that. And I don't need to be ashamed of that. I made the decision that I made for the right reason. I don't need to justify it. And I am not alone in having had multiple abortions. It was health care that I needed and I received. And so I think that term rare says some abortions are okay and some are not, and someone besides the person getting them gets to decide which. What I'm shifting is safe, legal, and accessible. Roe, for all the good it has done, it was the floor. It was never the ceiling. Roe never guaranteed access. For these 49 years that Roe has been the law of the land, for most of it, most of the people in this country have not had abortion clinics in their area. They have had to travel for it. They have had to jump through hoop after hoop after hoop after hoop. People who are wealthy and privileged can access abortion care, and people who are not cannot. And so Roe did not guarantee accessibility. So I want abortion care to be safe and legal and accessible. The other piece that I'm talking about that I care a lot about language is that we don't say that we're going back to the 1970s. We're not going back to the back alleys of the early 70s. When Roe falls, it will be bad. That's for sure. It's going to be bad for some people. But we have medication abortion now. We have better ways of sharing information. We have ways of teaching each other. We have each other's backs, and we have ways of getting information out to each other. I just think this fear mongering is not helpful, and it increases trauma. It increases trauma. We know this from the climate movement. There's a lot to be fearful of about the climate movement, and we've got a lot that we've got to do. And screaming fearfully is not making people do what we need them to do, right? It's not working. And so I got to give our opposition credit. They have been incredibly disciplined, and I think we need that kind of discipline too. So abortion is legal still in this country. In most states, you can still access abortion with a lot of hoops to jump through. It is still legal in Minnesota. It's going to be legal here, and we are going to keep working. People are not giving up. We are going to keep working. And as a theologian, I am going to keep talking about the right to make our own decisions, bodily autonomy as a most basic human right, as a theological principle, the most basic human right, our bodily autonomy, our ability to be whole and human, to make choices is one of the things that makes us human. It makes us, I think, fearfully and wonderfully made. I want to pause there and ask if there are any questions that you would have at this moment, or any thoughts you want to share. Oh, looks like Kyle Roberts is on with us. Hi, Kyle.
You know, I've been
Please.
thinking a lot about, well, first name that I am a child of a very unwanted pregnancy. So deem that as my location of this conversation. I've been thinking a lot about this denial of access to abortion in the name of pro-life, simultaneously, and I think you referenced this with the fervor around the Second Amendment, which, you know, we're of course just past the tremendous tragedy of loss of children's lives, hate crime in Buffalo, and so forth. But honestly, most of the handgun violence in this country is suicide. And I've been thinking a lot about, in a sense, both of those movements, while labeled pro-life, are not. And I wonder what our responsibility as progressive theologians is to actually claim a space of life, life for the parents, life for the, to prevent people from taking their own lives. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to use the pro-life label, but I also think that there's a death dealing reality labeled pro-life, and how do we frame a genuinely life affirming theology?
I think so. I think so too. So the question is, how do we? There is a death dealing to the folks who are very pro Second Amendment and who are not caring for people after they're born, I think, right? The activist and theologian, the Reverend Cherise Scott, she works in Memphis. Her organization is called Sister Reach. And I just listened to a keynote that she did today, and she refers to reproductive justice as pro-lives. We are pro-lives. We are for all the lives of all the people, right? We care about the quality and the expansiveness of the lives of the people in the community. We are concerned with the life of the whole community. And so I think the question that you raise, that most handguns are used, most deaths by handguns are from suicide, but we don't fund mental health to the way it should be. We don't fund healthcare, a mess of a healthcare system, right? All the things that we don't fund.
Half the money that they spend to fight abortion and put it into mental health, how many lives?
Right, right. So I think we know that this fight for control of people's bodies and their bedrooms really has everything to do with control, with authoritarianism, and nothing to do with equity or quality of life. It has everything to do with control and authoritarianism. And I don't even think it's that secretive. I mean, the dominionists are not that secretive about it. We will tell you what to do. It's this Christianism, and this is what we're going to do. And this, we think authoritarianism is best for this country. It's best for power.
And I'm from the land of Arizona, where they're legally allowed to use disinformation to convince women not to have abortions by lying to them about what it's going to do to their future ability and all of these things, and posing as clinics when they're really not.
Right. We have that in Minnesota, right? And so we have what are so-called crisis pregnancy centers. And what they do is pose as abortion clinics, and they say that they're giving you an ultrasound, but they often misdate the date of the length of the pregnancy or the gestation period, so that when someone finally gets to an abortion clinic, they are weeks later than they thought they would be. In many states, they receive funds from the government. Yeah, it's a big money thing. There's some candidate running somewhere, and his slogan is bullets, babies, and borders. for guns and anti-abortion and the border. I mean, it's honest. It's exactly what it is. I'll talk more about activism in the third session. I mean, I think political activism is a lot of what we can do, but I think as theologians, we have to talk about it. We have to say the word abortion. We have to not be afraid of it. And we have to move off the frame of, oh, well, it's tragic. Sometimes it has to happen, but it's just tragic. I'm telling you, it's not tragic for everyone. For some people, it is. And I don't want to assume that for some people it's not. Likewise, someone shouldn't assume that for me it was, right? Or that it was a difficult decision. It's the hardest decision any woman ever makes. No, it was not the hardest decision I ever made. Maybe the hardest decision that I ever made was to get pregnant the last time I was pregnant. The pregnancy that ended with my daughter after we had gone through the cycles of infertility and a couple of miscarriages. I mean, I have had the reproductive life. There have been a lot of hard decisions. The decision not to parent when I wasn't ready to parent was not the hardest decision I ever made. That may have been the darkest time of my life, when I was in a place that I wish I hadn't been, but I'm not there anymore. And I think we make meaning out of our lives. We make meaning out of the places we have been. And I wouldn't be the place that I am now had I not been there in that dark night of the soul. I have a Kyle, anything you would add into the conversation?
Well, thank you, Kelly, for this wonderful presentation.
We can't hear you, but that may be because hold on a minute. That may be because we're muted here. Hold on. Hold on. Stella's working on it. Okay, try now, Kyle.
Can you hear me now? Well, I think it was a wonderful presentation, Kelly. Thank you. Lot to think about, and I was wondering about the kind of the theology of the person, sort of theological anthropology, and how, as theological thinkers, we might enter this debate or conversation by, querying or having conversation about what makes a person. The sort of soul body dichotomy, which is heritage of kind of Platonic dualism infiltrating Christianity. We kind of know all of that story, but that's, I think, in some respects central to ideas people have within conservative Christian circles. If the soul is immediately kind of injected into the zygote at conception, then suddenly people have this idea, right, of what this zygote is and what it means that, this is equally a person to someone outside of the womb, to a person outside of the womb. And that needs to be, I think, explored and interrogated a bit. But that's hard work. I mean, that's intricate theological deconstruction, right? To kind of have a conversation about what the composition of a person is theologically, anthropologically. But if you have any thoughts about that, that's great. But it kind of is probably a whole whole nother session unto itself, perhaps.
Let's see. I think that is, it's a really worthy question. And I think theologians have been working on it for a very long time. Philosophers have been working on it for a very long time. And some of the ways that philosophers have worked on it are, you know, are we rational? Are we conscious? Are we capable of reciprocity? Can we communicate? Do we have self-consciousness? Well, that's all good until we begin to talk about people who are born or have disability in their life. And so, like everything about nature, there's a spectrum, right? What is it to be, if I meet 4 or 5 of the characteristics, am I fully human? If I have all of these, but I cannot speak, am I fully human? Am I, you know, I think what happens when we are in the business of defining, as theologians have done, and then they've pushed it back and back and back to that very moment of the is conception, which is not a scientific term, it's a theological term, the moment of the sperm meets the egg or the zygote implants. Nobody knows, right? It defines it for everybody. So if that's not your theology, you're stuck with somebody else's understanding. And I try to put myself in the understanding sometimes of, if I thought that that zygote had the same value as a 4th grader at Uvalde Robb Elementary School, what wouldn't I do to protect them? I might do anything that I could. But I think, again, when we focus on that tiny, tiny beingness, and our only focus is on that moment of personhood, we get mired in a kind of emotional manipulation. And I think what I'm doing, Kyle, is it's hard for me to have the conversation without connecting it to a political conversation. And it's probably very worthy of theological and philosophical exploration outside of a political conversation. I'm not sure how we do it outside of a political frame. At least I can't do so in this current moment. So yeah, I like the question though. I'm going to close us with this lovely poem, a prayer for the journey toward reproductive justice by the Reverend Dr. Elizabeth Keaton. I think she's United Methodist. I wouldn't swear to that. Pray with me, if you will. Holy, gracious, and loving God, you are wise beyond our knowing. You have gifted us with intelligence, memory, reason, and skill. You fill our lives with experience in which we may freely use these gifts. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. Before we were born, you knew us. You knew our deepest thoughts, our fiercest passions, our deepest longings, our ancient hurts, our wildest dreams and our strongest fears. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. When we were being shaped and formed in the secrets of our mother's womb, you also knit together in us strong threads of liberation and justice, will and grace, and set us free to live our lives as human beings fully alive. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. We are complex beings living complicated lives. Give us the courage to discern what is right and what is good, knowing that the two may not always be the same. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. Help us and help us help others to respect all of life, especially the lives of people who have been denied justice, their intelligence questioned, their choices limited, their freedom denied. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. Inspire our minds, fire our spirits, and strengthen our wills, that justice and compassion may always be our companions on this journey, and that we may know your peace. For we are fearfully and wonderfully made. May it be so, and amen. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great, and let me thank you, Kelly, for being here with us this evening. We're really grateful for your witness and for your words of wisdom tonight, and we're looking forward to having you talk to us about pastoral care in the middle of reproductive decisions, reproductive loss, and how congregations can be activists. So thank you so much for being here tonight.
Glad to do it. Thanks.